For 60 years, the world thought it knew Don Rickles. He was the king, the fearless comedy assassin who built a legacy on insults. He was the merchant of venom, the guy who could make Frank Sinatra the most powerful man in showbiz howl, with laughter while being cut down to size. He'd stand before presidents and Hollywood royalty, and with a devilish grin, dismantle their egos while they begged for more. We all knew that Don Rickles. We saw the swagger, heard the thunderous laughter, and believed the myth of the man who feared nothing, but the spotlight is a liar. It lights up the performance but casts the truth into deep shadow. Behind the curtain of his legendary career, a very different story was unfolding. A story of heartbreaking tragedy, secret fears, and a private grief so profound it was hidden from the public for decades, locked away behind the laughter. Now, years after his passing, the silence is finally breaking. His daughter, Mindy Rickles, is opening up about the family's private reality, and what she's revealing is not pretty at all. This is the story of the Don Rickles you never knew, the loving husband and father shattered by loss, and the devastating secret of guilt he carried to his grave. To understand the tragedy, you first have to understand the legend. Don Rickles wasn't just a comedian, he was a cultural phenomenon. His brand of comedy was a high-wire act without a net. In an era of carefully crafted jokes, Rickles was a blast of chaotic energy. He didn't really tell jokes. He held up a mirror to the powerful and famous and dared them not to laugh at their own reflection. His comedy was an equal opportunity assault. It didn't matter if you were black, white, Italian, Jewish, rich, or poor. If you were in his audience, you were a hockey puck, and you were fair game. This audacious style earned him the ironic nickname that would define his career, Mr. Warmth. The name was famously given to him by Johnny Carson, who became one of Rickles' greatest champions. Rickles appeared on The Tonight Show over 100 times, and every single appearance was an exercise in controlled chaos. He'd hijack the show, insult the other guests, and spar with Carson, all while the host laughed until he cried. Carson, like so many others, understood the secret. Beneath the insults, there was no real malice. It was a performance, a shared understanding that, for an hour, the normal rules didn't apply. His daughter Mindy confirmed that people took the mocking in stride because they could just sense he was a warm person doing an act. His rise wasn't exactly swift. Born in Queens, New York, he learned early that humor was a shield. His father, Max, was an immigrant from Lithuania, and his mother, Etta, was born in New York to Austrian immigrants. Don learned to use laughter as a defense against hardship, a trait that would define his career and his private life. After serving in the Navy during World War II, he tried his hand at a stable career selling insurance. He was terrible at it. The very personality that would make him a star was poison. In door-to-door sales, he then tried the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, but his attempts at serious drama just made people laugh. It was in the grimy nightclubs of New York, Miami, and LA that he found his voice. He realized the hecklers weren't obstacles, they were material. He started firing back, and the insult comic was born. For years, he was a struggling nobody. The turning point came in 1957. Frank Sinatra walked into a Miami club where he was performing. A nervous club owner begged Rickles to be on his best behavior. Instead, Rickles saw his moment. He looked at the most powerful entertainer in the world and said, "Make yourself at home, Frank, hit somebody." The room went dead silent. And then, Sinatra erupted in laughter, falling out of his chair. That single moment changed everything. From that night on, Don Rickles was in. He became a favorite of the Rat Pack, a Vegas headliner, and a star. He had created the perfect persona, the one man who could say anything to anyone and get away with it. The man on stage was a brilliant mask that brought in fame and fortune. But what about the man who went home after the lights went down? Was he the same fearless gladiator? The answer, which is only now becoming clear, is a resounding no. The public persona of Don Rickles was perhaps his greatest act of all, a carefully constructed shield protecting a far more sensitive and vulnerable man. For decades, the family upheld this image, maintaining a strict code of silence. But in recent years, that silence has started to break. His daughter, Mindy Rickles, has begun to share the story the public never saw. She paints a picture not of the merchant of venom, but of a devoted family man whose life was colored by incredible love and then shattered by unspeakable loss. The revelations are shocking because they stand in such stark contrast to the myth. She spoke of a family that lived with real fear and a father, haunted by his own success and a private pain so deep it nearly consumed him. The family faced more hardship than anyone ever knew, including the constant pressure to maintain appearances, no matter what was happening behind closed doors. The decision to speak out seems to come from a desire to set the record straight, to present a fuller, more honest portrait of her father. It's an attempt to move beyond the one-dimensional legend of Mr. Warmth and acknowledge the complex and often troubled man who existed off stage. The truth is, the laughter that echoed in sold-out showrooms for 60 years was masking a quiet, persistent heartbreak. The story of Don Rickles isn't just a comedy, it's a tragedy. To truly get the depths of the family's sorrow, you first have to understand the foundation of their world, the extraordinary 56-year love affair between Don and Barbara Rickles. When he finally met Barbara Sklar, Don was nearly 40 and pretty much a confirmed bachelor. He was married to the road, to the smoky clubs and late nights. Then, his agent introduced him to a young woman from Philadelphia. She was beautiful, smart, and what intrigued Don most was that she didn't immediately laugh at his jokes. She wasn't impressed by the performer. She was interested in the man. He was instantly smitten. They married on March 14, 1965, and for the next 5 decades, they were inseparable. Their marriage became one of the most enduring and happy unions in Hollywood, a town famous for fleeting romances. Barbara was his anchor and his confidant. On stage, he'd joke endlessly about his wife, playing the long-suffering husband. But in private, he spoke of her with a reverence that was deeply touching. He called her his life. In one of his final tweets, celebrating their 52nd anniversary, he wrote, "Happy anniversary, my dear wife, Barbara, you are my life." Barbara was more than just his wife, she was his partner. She ran their home, raised their 2 children, and Larry Ann provided the stability that allowed his chaotic career to flourish. While he was Mr. Warmth to the world, at home, he was just a husband and a dad. According to his daughter, he loved simple pleasures, like sitting in his chair watching TV and telling everyone to leave him alone. He loved a good bowl of pasta, and would always order a plate of cookies for the table to share. This was the real Don Rickles, a man who, despite his immense fame, found his greatest joy in the quiet moments of family life. He was a doting father to Mindy, who would follow him into comedy, and Larry, who became a successful TV producer. This image of a loving, tight-knit family is essential because it establishes the monumental stakes. They had built a beautiful life, a sanctuary from the public eye. For all the jokes about being a miserable hockey puck, Don Rickles was a deeply happy man. But that happiness was fragile, and it was about to be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. Long before tragedy struck, the Rickles family lived under a unique and constant strain. The happy home was real, but it was a home under siege from pressures the public could never understand. While Don projected absolute fearlessness on stage, his family's private life was marked by very real anxieties. The early years were a financial struggle, and that fear never entirely went away. But the more significant fears weren't about money. As his fame grew from his performances in clubs, often frequented by mobsters, Don's career began to intersect with a genuinely dangerous world. His daughter Mindy recently confirmed that the family faced real threats from the mob. These weren't just jokes, they were real-life encounters with terrifying consequences. The most famous incident involved the notorious mafioso Crazy Joe Gallo. In 1972, Gallo was in the audience at the Copacabana. Despite warnings, Rickles went right after him. After the show, an amused Gallo invited Rickles for a late-night meal at Umberto's Clam House. For whatever reason, Rickles said no. Later that same night, Joe Gallo was gunned down in a mob hit at that very restaurant. It was a brush with death that highlighted the perilous line Rickles walked. This, and other incidents like it, contributed to a quiet terror within the family. He wasn't fearless. He just played a fearless man on TV. Adding to this was the immense pressure of fame itself. Mindy described a home life overshadowed by her father's celebrity. There was a constant need to project an image of perfection, to hide any internal struggles. The weight of being Don Rickles didn't end when he walked off stage. It followed him home, a burden the entire family had to carry. The pressure on the Rickles family was immense, long before the ultimate tragedy struck. If you're finding this look behind the curtain of a comedy legend compelling, take a moment to subscribe for more stories you thought you knew. What came next for Don Rickles? For a man in his prime, Larry wasn't just the son of a famous comedian. He was a talented man in his own right. He'd followed his father into showbiz, but forged his own path behind the camera, writing for the hit sitcom Murphy Brown. His greatest achievement, though, was tied to his father. Larry produced the 2007 HBO documentary, Mr. Warmth, The Don Rickles Project. The film was a brilliant, intimate portrait of his father's life. It was a critical triumph, earning 2 Emmy Awards, one for Don himself, and one for Larry, as a producer of the special. It was a moment of immense pride, a son honoring his father and being recognized at the highest level. It seemed like the beginning of a long career, and then, just 4 years later, he was gone. For any parent, losing a child is the ultimate nightmare. For Don and Barbara, it was a wound that would never heal. Friends said the loss completely broke them. Don, who was 85 at the time, was shattered. The man who had a comeback for everything was left silenced by grief. In a rare moment of public vulnerability, Rickles admitted, "It was a horror. It absolutely broke my heart. With my son was the only time that I fell apart a little bit." But recent family revelations suggest it was more than just falling apart. According to Mindy, the guilt and grief her father carried over Larry's death were profound and nearly destroyed him. This hints at the secret he carried to his grave. It wasn't just sadness, it was guilt. While the specific reasons remain private, one can imagine the thoughts that must have tormented a grieving parent. One source revealed that even 5 years after Larry's death, Don was still racked with grief. The joyful spark that powered his comedy was irrevocably dimmed. He kept performing, maybe because it was the only way to escape the crushing weight of his sorrow. But for those who knew him best, he was never the same. The final decade of Don Rickles' life was lived in the long shadow of his son's death. The grief was a constant guest. Outwardly, he was still Mr. Warmth, selling out theaters and making audiences roar. He continued to work, voicing Mr. Potato Head in the Toy Story franchise, a role that, ironically, made him a hero to his grandchildren. But inwardly, he was a man adrift in sorrow. Through it all, his wife Barbara remained his rock. She was grieving just as deeply, but she was also tasked with holding her husband together. Their bond, forged over half a century, was now tempered in a crucible of shared sorrow. They leaned on each other, a team until the very end. As he entered his 90s, Don's own health began to fail. On April 6, 2017, at the age of 90, Don Rickles died at his home in Los Angeles from kidney failure. With hypertension and type 2 diabetes listed as contributing factors, the world mourned a comedy icon. Tributes poured in from across the globe. But for his family, it was the loss of a husband, a father, and a grandfather. After his death, Barbara even took over his Twitter account, keeping his memory alive for his loyal fans. But the Rickles family tragedy had one final, heartbreaking chapter. Barbara, who had been battling non-Hodgkin lymphoma, saw her own health decline after Don's passing. It was as if, with her partner gone, her will to fight began to wane. And then, in a turn of events so tragically poetic it feels scripted, Barbara Rickles passed away in March 2021. She died on the eve of what would have been their 56th wedding anniversary. It was a final, poignant testament to a love story, so powerful, it seemed it couldn't exist in a world where both partners weren't present. With Barbara's death, the story of their generation of the Rickles family came to a close, with the full, heartbreaking context laid bare. The decision by his daughter, Mindy, to finally open up makes perfect sense. For decades, the story of Don Rickles was a public narrative, polished for mass consumption. It was the story of the insult comic, the Vegas legend, the voice of Mr. Potato Head. But it was an incomplete story, one without shadows, and therefore, without depth. What Mindy has started to share is the family's story. It's a narrative that includes the parts that were too painful to share before. She has confirmed the fear that came with mob threats, the crushing pressure of maintaining a public facade, and most importantly, the devastating impact of her brother Larry's death. She has given voice to the profound guilt and sorrow that Don carried, a burden he hid from his audience behind a storm of insults. This isn't about tarnishing a legacy, it's about completing it. It's about reclaiming her father from the caricature he so brilliantly played. It's an effort to show the world the man she knew, the devoted husband, the loving father, and the sensitive soul who was nearly broken by grief. By revealing the pain, she isn't diminishing the laughter. She is adding a layer of profound humanity to his story, ensuring he is remembered not just as a great comedian, but as a complex and deeply feeling human being. The life of Don Rickles was one of tragic irony. Here was a man who made his fortune selling insults, yet was privately a deeply loyal friend and family man. He was called Mr. Warmth as a joke, but he was the warm center of his family's world. He spent 60 years making the world laugh, filling theaters with joy, all while his own heart was quietly breaking. His story is a powerful reminder that no amount of money or adoration can shield a person from the fundamental pains of being human. The legend of Don Rickles, the fearless merchant of venom, will live on forever in classic clips and comedy lore. But thanks to his family's courage in sharing their truth, we now have a richer, more complete picture. We have the story of Don Rickles the man, a man who faced down Frank Sinatra but was felled by the loss of his son. A man whose greatest act wasn't his comedy, but his resilience in the face of unimaginable sorrow. He was more than a hockey puck. He was a husband, a father, and a legend in more ways than one.